My name is David Hilson. I'm 33 years old and I experienced a traumatic event. Something that brought me to Institute. It's been 3 years since the event, and it's been 3 years since I was able just to speak. I'm here today as part of my therapy, and as Dr. and you have requested, I am supposed to talk about what happened before the event as part of my rehabilitation, in hopes of being able to cope better with what happened. To be honest, I can't remember too much from before. My teens and most of my 20s, it's all just a blur. I wasn't a very good kid. I got heavily involved with a bad crowd at a young age, and they got me into a lot of trouble growing up. But when I was in my teens was when I was introduced to weed and alcohol. From that point on, I spent as much time as I could chasing a good high or just being drunk. The real problem came in my 20s when one of my buddies at the time took me to a nightclub and got me to do coke. After that, I was just finding odd jobs, saving money just to get more. I'd spend as much time as I possibly could in a haze of white powder, brown liquor, and green herbs. When I try to recall anything specific around that time, all that comes to mind is dark rooms, blurry lights, and the occasional face of someone, like a girl I had sex with after getting blackout drunk, or a face of a dealer I was trying to play buddy-buddy with for an easier time. It just all crawls by in my mind like a heavy fog, but then it gets clear and sharp. Sharp to the point that it cuts through everything else in my head. At some point, I ran into a horrible dry spell. I hadn't had anything in over a week. I was starting to go through withdrawals. I was out of money. None of my hookups would speak to me anymore, and I was hiding out in an abandoned house deep in the bad part of some poor little city. I tried standing next to nearby highways and intersections begging for help. I had a sign that said homeless, disabled, and whenever someone would give me some cash, I would just look at them and say, God bless. I wanted something so bad, but I didn't want to sell myself short on the first cheap thing I could get. I wanted to enjoy it, and I wanted to enjoy it the way that I wanted it, so I kept at it, saving what I could get from people, and occasionally stealing from whoever was an easy target. I even dug through trash and stole food just so I could eat and not have to use any of the money I had. All so I could just save for the next chance to erase myself. After some time, I'm not sure how long exactly, I finally had enough for what I needed. I walked to one of the shitty Waffle House like diners in the city, and I used one of their bathrooms to freshen up a bit before heading after the only spot left that might have what I was looking for. I washed off as much of the filth sticking to my skin. Once I left the diner, I started walking to the place my last dealer mentioned in a one-off conversation. A place with a funny name, but really lacks, and where someone always has something. I walked past tons of broken windowed houses on the street leading to the bar. One house had a patio with an empty rusted dog crate on it, and another house was just missing its door completely and had a camping tent set up in the front yard. And I paused at an intersection and saw all the trash lying in the tall grass around me. Fast food bags, broken glass, flat tires, broken car parts. even a used condom dangling from the stop sign in this poorly lit cross. I can almost feel the humidity of that summer night just thinking about it. I walked to the end of the street, and when my feet felt the asphalt turn to gravel of the bar's parking lot, I was almost excited. The bar was surprisingly full, and a handful of older biker-looking dudes at one table immediately started staring me down. I turned towards the bar and started just heading towards the back, but the bartender stopped me before I could pass the end of the counter. He gave me a nasty look and asked what I wanted. I paused and then told him bourbon, double, and slid some money across the counter to him. He raised an eyebrow, probably surprised with my order with how I looked. He handed me a thick glass and then let me continue on my way. I sat at a table in the back, enjoying every sip of the bourbon as the spice rolled over my tongue and burning my throat. A girl with red hair wearing these torn blue jeans and a very low-cut black top walked past me, but then came back. She said she hadn't recognized me and asked my name. I told her my name was Dave. She said her name was Claire. I said something to her along the lines of, "Claire, would you know anyone in here who could provide me with something other than this bourbon?" She gave me a flirty kind of look after that. Her eyes running up and down me with a slight smile, just barely showing the glint of her teeth. She nodded her head towards another area in the bar. I took that as a sign to follow her, so I did. We went to a table with one of the biker-looking guys. He was older with gray and dirty blonde long hair, leather jacket, long mustache and beard, and a wheeze sound with everything he did. Claire walked up and sat with him. She said, "Jerry, my new friend here wants something more than a drink." Jerry eyed me sternly and asked me what I wanted, similar to the bartender when I first came in. He said it so direct as though his words were already resting on a trigger. With the confidence the bourbon had provided me at this point, I responded just as direct. "I want Coke and some weed." Jerry responded, "You sure don't look like someone who can afford that," which caused me to reply back as a smartass with, "Well, you sure don't look like someone I usually buy from." I was surprised by myself at that moment and expected Jerry to lash out at me or have one of his friends in the bar come do it for him. Instead, he gave a deep wheezing chuckle, pulled a little bag of weed from his pocket, and said, "Alright, you got me there. Here's something for now. It's 60 for that and 120 for the Coke. It'll be a few minutes before I can get it here, so enjoy yourself until it arrives." I was lucky to have the money I did. I wasn't in a position to argue down on prices with him, so I paid Jerry up front, took the weed, and returned to the area in the back of the bar where I was sitting before. Claire got up and followed me back to the table. She slid a blunt already rolled for me with a lighter. I took a big swig of my drink and then lit the blunt. Time passes a little more in that haze as it all started to hit, but what made things clear up a little was at some point later, Claire came back to me with the Coke. I remember we did a few lines and she started kissing me. And I was in bliss for a moment, but before I could let it all take over, I felt her tongue roll over mine and something fell into my mouth. It felt like a piece of food. I pulled back slightly, but Claire stopped me and said it was just a little gift from her to make things even better. I accepted the gift, letting whatever it was fall to the back of my tongue and down my throat, and we started making out again for a bit, but time gets a little strange there. I remember pulling away because I started to feel uncomfortable. My high was shifting, and in one way was letting up a bit, but in another way it was getting worse. My heart started racing as things shifted and moved around in my vision, almost the same way it does before a blackout, but just different somehow. I looked back at Claire. She stood up and walked over to me, telling me to come back with her, but something told me no. Even with how ridiculously high I was, something kept me from going with her. I told her I'd had enough and I was gonna head out, but this seemed to make her angry. She grabbed my arm and said to sit back down and that she wasn't done with me yet. I was scared now. I wasn't even sure why, but her grip hit me like electricity and shocked me enough to realize I was in danger. I shook off her grip and told her I was done, and then her face lunged at me. She didn't, but it was if the image of her face leaped off toward me while her body stayed where it was. I stumbled back from this, but she tried to grab me again. The whole time her face continued to cast this leaping shadow of itself at me. I was scared and reacted by pushing her away and telling her to stay away from me. She hit the floor and slid on her butt, and the bar got quiet. Everyone looked at us. Claire glared up at me and shouted to Jerry, who responded with, "What the hell's going on here?" She shouted back to him something like, "This piece of shit's trying to steal your stuff." At that moment, someone grabbed me from behind and everyone's face started doing the same as Claire's. Claire got up, walked over to me, put her hand in my pocket and whispered into my ear, "You should have just played along," before pulling a bag out of my pocket with what looked like more coke to me. Jerry yelled and started coming towards me. I shook hard and managed to free myself from whoever had been holding on to me. I ran for the door, scared of the faces assaulting me and the oncoming beating, sure to follow if those bodies they were coming from caught up to me. I remember hitting the door, my head spinning, my foot catching the base of the door, and I fell into the gravel parking lot, which cut my hands up as I braced my fall. I got up and ran up the street. I didn't know what to do, and stupidly I ran in the opposite direction from where I came. I ran up the road to another intersection by the woods. Then along the roadside in one direction, I heard the guys from the bar shouting as they chased after me, and the sound of a motorcycle, or maybe two or more, starting up. I heard them closing in. I already wasn't thinking right, but I panicked. I heard the motorcycles, so I ran off the road into the woods on the side. I stumbled through tall weeds and garbage as I got further into the woods, and I heard someone shout, "Jerry, he ran that way!" A bullet crashed against a tree near me and someone shouted, "Son of a bitch is getting away!" I couldn't tell who, and I didn't care enough to find out. I was terrified. My chest felt tight like I was trying to breathe through a plastic bag. I ran over the hill and fell again. I was so worn out, but my fear got me back to my feet, and I kept moving forward, towards a light in a distance. I had nowhere else to go, no idea where I was, so I just moved towards the light till it came into view. Of all places, it was church. I could have wished for nearly anything else. But I wasn't going to be picky at that moment, especially when I heard voices in the distance again. I ran straight for it. The church was just across the street now. One side I could see had a walkway, long and covered just past an empty parking lot. The other side was an open field leading to a flat concrete square just before some steps. The light I saw was coming from the side with the walkway, so I ran across the street, through the parking lot, and down the walkway towards the large wooden doors with glass windows. I knocked and shouted for help. I heard the voices getting louder and the engines of their motorcycles getting closer too, so I began to pull on the doors, just finding them unlocked, so I rushed in. I turned and locked them, and I backed away from the doors further into the church. I didn't want them to find me, I just wanted it all to stop. I walked into the main lobby, which had a wall of glass with dark wood framing separating it from the actual interior of the church, where I guess the actual church services held. The walls were a tan color, and the floor was red carpet with segments of this tan marble tiles laid out. There were a few wooden seats near the walls and a large statue in the middle of the glass divider. The statue was some sort of saint, but I couldn't say which. I just knew it wasn't Jesus, and I couldn't focus enough to read the name on the plate. Just as I was taking in my surroundings, I heard the men near the door had just came through. The panic rushed back, and I ran through the doors on the end of the glass divider. Inside the service area were many wooden pews on a slight downward slope leading towards an open area at the altar. Behind it were these two large wooden chairs, and behind that was a large brick wall with red bricks and a realistic statue of Jesus hung on a cross. And I ran down the sloping aisle and laid in one of the pews, quivering and hoping with everything that they wouldn't find me. For a minute or two, I just laid there. I heard the voices, and they even got louder for a moment, like they had made it into the church, but soon they softened and went away. The relief I felt when their voices stopped was better than the high I had before everything went wrong. I thought I was awake, but I must have fallen asleep. Everything was black, but I could still hear subtle noises of the church. A water fountain bubbling near the entrance, and the air conditioning, and something else, something like a quiet, soft static. I don't remember. I don't think I did. But I must have been sleeping. I had to have. It was such a short amount of time, but out of nowhere, that relaxation was shattered when I heard him. Repent. That boom came out of nothingness. It was so loud and violent. I shook and fell out of the pew into the floor, and when I stood up, as terrified as I was before, thinking they had found me, I looked around and the church was still empty. Same as it was. Like an idiot, I called out, "Is someone there?" Nothing but quiet. Except different now. That soft static had grown louder, and now I couldn't hear the fountain. I felt my heart racing faster than it ever had been. And again, I heard it. Repent. My entire body shook, and I felt it through my bones. I screamed and stumbled into the path of the altar. I looked up at the glass divider where I had came from, but there was nothing there but a wall of darkness. The altar seemed to be the only spot with light on. I ran for the altar and shouted, "Who's there?" And right as I did, it appeared. The static grew louder, a sound like an orchestra with a single trumpet playing off key and twice as loud as the others. It bombarded me as light crashed down on the altar, and the eyes glared straight down into me. Eyes I couldn't even see. I lied on the marble at the foot of the altar, staring up in horror from the fetal position with tears in my eyes, and I knew. I don't know how, but I knew with my entire being, this thing that stood on the altar, this thing that radiated the most aggressive feeling I have ever felt in my life, this was an angel. I'd never read the Bible. I'd never gone to church. All I knew about Christians was just learned passively through media and people. I never would have imagined an angel would be like this. But something in me knew it was without any doubt. I cried. I slowly got to my knees, and I felt so much fear at that moment. I would have rather just suffered whatever Jerry and his gang could have done to me. I looked at this thing, this angel. It was so vivid and sharp, I couldn't have dreamt it. I wasn't high. I wasn't drunk. I was sober to the extent I had never experienced before that point. This thing was the outline of a human with nothing filling it. A glowing white hooded robe, but where a person's body would be inside, it was just this shifting mist in the shape of a person, but it was so difficult to see. A glowing aura created arches of this rolling gold light behind it, like ripples in a pond, and the only thing that was truly clear and defined of this creature was the wings, which had closed eyes at the end of every feather. 2 wings resting downward, 2 wings halfway extended at each side, and 2 wings crossing in front of the hood where that faceless phantom glared at me. I felt my body give way to its full presence, and I began to sob in utter despair. I wanted to ask what it wanted from me, but I was terrified of hearing it again. I knew the answer anyway. It had already said it twice. So instead, I just asked what its name was. Loud thunder crashed into me, the orchestra shouting all at once. I fell back to the ground in pain and fear. It didn't speak, but I heard its name. Its name was that sound, and that sound was its name. A sound I can't make, but it was so clearly communicated. I had so many questions I wanted to ask, and at the same time, I wanted to run away. The thing was supposed to be some messenger. That's all I ever heard from the Christians was how beautiful and loving the angels of God are. But this thing in front of me was so monstrous and radiated an aggression unlike anything I've ever seen. The upper wings lifted slightly, giving me a briefest glimpse into that misty nothingness underneath the hood of the glowing white robe and directly into the sight of its hateful being. This wasn't right. This wasn't how an angel should be. I couldn't help it. I got angry. I stood up and I shouted at it. I was tired of being frozen in the weight of this thing looming over me. I shouted, "Why do you hate me?" And the angel just turned. That rushing sound of static softened. I looked around and noticed that the darkness that had been near the glass divider was much closer now. The angel was like a candle flame, lighting just what was close, but at the same time, the contrast had made the darkness so much more dense. I turned back to the angel and started falling into that hopeless place again, remembering my life, all the things I did, all the bad I had done, and the time I spent wasted and trying to get wasted. I was awful, and this thing told me to repent. Something I should have done 1,000 times at least by now. I was such a terrible creature, so pathetic, so angry. Angry with how disgusted I was with myself. I got more angry realizing how much worse I looked to this angel. Even though I knew it would hurt for it to speak to me again, I stood and announced to it that I would go to God and repent for how I lived. The angel was still turned slightly away from me and remained still. I waited, but it stayed as it was, that gold halo just rippling slowly behind it. The glowing robe shifted ever so slightly. No sounds other than the soft static and low hum. I said it again, "I'll repent my ways. Take me to God so I can repent." Still, the angel did nothing, which just made me more angry. So I shouted, "I wanted to repent. That's how this works, right? I ask for God's forgiveness. I repent my ways to God, right? That's how the prayers are. That's all the stories. So just take me." This time the angel moved, but only to turn away from me more. I was so mad. I was mad at myself and mad at the angel for ignoring me. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't come here for this. I just wanted to get away from some people who are even worse than me. The anger took over, and I tried to grab the angel. I guess I thought I could pull it to face me, as if it was a person. I wanted it to face me, and to do what I said. Take me was all I got out when I reached for it, and immediately it faced me. In an instant, this horrible screeching sound bellowed out of that nothingness with the same tremendous force as the other times before, only now it was just like nails on glass. It pierced into me, my head pounding and my body shaking. Its wings stretched out, the eyes on every feather open wide. It all vanished in an instant, leaving only that halo, which rushed over me like a tunnel. A tube of light with images I couldn't understand or see clearly, as though I was just on a train going 1,000,000 miles an hour and trying to look out the window for something. And now, suddenly, I was on a hill in front of a large stone frame. The angel was to my left. Beyond the stone frame was a huge open field, and in the distance, a massive mountain. My body felt like it was being crushed from every direction by boulders, and I slowly rolled to my side to face the angel. I gritted my teeth, bearing the pain enough to say it. "Where's God?" The angel's wings shifted, pointing forward to the stone frame. As I turned back to the frame, it acted like a screen protecting me from what I was seeing. In the distance, through the frame, more angels appeared and slowly descended from the clouds, hovering over the mountaintop. As they came down, the sound of the orchestra continued getting louder, making the weight I felt crushing me even heavier. I struggled to lift my head. My ears began to bleed, and my breath left me before I could even take it all in. They stopped descending, and for a time, I laid there. Whether it be seconds, or minutes, or more, I can't say. The sound was so familiar, almost like it had been there all along. But finally, I screamed out, "Stop." I just screamed. I screamed as loud as I could with the little air I could get into my lungs. I screamed to the angels standing near me. Make them stop. Stop the noise, I beg you. The angel stayed to my side, still looking towards the mountain, but waved one of its lower wings, and the tormenting choir softened. It softened just enough for me to catch my breath. I gasped over and over until I could finally muster the strength to stand, and when I did, I walked towards the angel who brought me here. As I approached, I turned, and when it looked at me this time, I knew what it would say without it having to use that thundering voice. I just knew this time, for a second, that aggression it bared so heavily onto me gave way to just a small break of concern. It was asking if I was sure. If I was ready for what I was asking for. Like the stupid piece of shit I am, I said I was ready. I said, "Show me." Just then, the angel next to me turned back to the mountain. A loud and low, thundering trumpet sound rang out. Its wings opened fully, and I was knocked aside by the gust of wind that came from it. I stumbled, trying to keep myself up, and looked out to the mountain behind the stone frame. The angels floating in the distance all began to lower their wings, the forms slowly shifting as their orchestral sound softened more and more. As the sound grew quiet, the clouds began to part and a light began to grow. Before I could blink, the small glowing sphere had grown as large as the mountain, erasing the clouds completely, sending a force like an explosion crashing into me, but there was no sound. Everything was silent. It all happened so fast. It was silent, and then it was there. It was horrifying. It was this horrifying thing. A floating ball, an amalgamation of shifting faces, textures, colors, just everything. The silence was shattering me as I tried to take in what it was. This grotesque ball of everything, all things shifting around. It was every animal, every flower, every face, everything that could be, everything that would be, everything that's existed. It was in the silence. It was the silence. It's everything. It knows everything. It is everything. That's why they sing. That's why they never stop the trumpets. It's to hold it back, to keep it there in that place, to keep us hidden from the silence of everything. And now I can't go back. I can't stop. That's where it is. It's in the silence. It is the silence. I can't stop. I can't go back. It's the silence. It's in the silence.